Good afternoon and a warm welcome back to Tactics Board. Hopefully we're all feeling positive after a huge win for Norwich City last weekend at Preston North End, but now it's time to come back down to earth and preview what will be a difficult championship fixture for Norwich against Coventry City, because without entering too much cliche territory, it is going to be one of those games against a hard-working, organised, structured opposition in Coventry, and yet they have also got some interesting attacking players and some dangerous players in the likes of Gustavo Hamer, Tyler Walker, Gyökeres, who's scored 12 goals so far this season and will certainly provide a threat to Norwich. So it's not going to be too easy for Norwich heading to the CBS Arena. I'm going to take a look at the tactical nuances of the game and how I expect them to play out, as well as a predicted 11, which may not prove particularly difficult. But we're going to focus for our sort of tactical side of things on the fullbacks, because that's been something that's spoken about a lot throughout sort of the breakdown of David Wagner's tactical systems and how Norwich might benefit from that. And I think we saw the signs of that really clearly in that Preston game. Dimitris Giannoulis and Max Aarons both turning out very impressive performances indeed. And I've actually got a clip from David Wagner speaking about how important fullbacks are to his system, hopefully to provide a little bit of background before we then break down how they do that.
Yeah, I think this is no secret. In the idea of our football, the fullbacks are the fourth or fifth offensive player, which have the opportunity to create chances, to score, to be offensive threat without forgetting to defend and make sure that you keep clean sheets. I think we have with them two real quality with the potential to deliver this, and I think they've shown it in the first two games. We still have a lot of work to do. Obviously, there is not the 100% harmony with the pairs with the winger, but can't be. We are only here for a week. But they have the skills that they can help the group for sure.
Now there he was, David Wagner, speaking about how important those fullbacks were, and as I said, you could see that. And what's the real difference is basically that they've been let off the leash, or the most basic difference, I suggest. Max Aarons and Dimitris Giannoulis, or Sam McCallum, who featured sort of towards the latter stages of Dean Smith's tenure, were generally seen as part of a back four alongside Grant Hanley and Andrew Omobamidele most commonly, and they weren't really seen as sort of wing backs who attack. Whereas now it's almost like you've got a back two and they're more part of the midfield or even the sort of forward line when they're part of an attack. And that's a real benefit for the likes of Aarons and Giannoulis, who were recruited to play under Daniel Farke. And I don't want to draw too many parallels between the systems of Wagner and Farke, because they're not quite as similar as I think some maybe would like to simplistically believe. But one area where they are quite similar is that fullback area, because he wants fullbacks probably more on the opposition byline than on their own. And I think that was evidenced by a lot of the play last Saturday. Max Aarons popping up in the box to produce an assist with that back heel for Kieran Dowell, and Dimitris Giannoulis a couple of driving runs forward with the freedom to go and do that without worrying about what he's going to do in case Norwich lose the ball. And I've got this diagram here that shows sort of how the team adapts from its base formation to allow the fullbacks around the outsides and to create a space for them to do that. A bit of a spoiler for my predicted 11, but you've got obviously Hanley and Omobamidele remaining in position, Kenny McLean dropping a little bit deeper, and then the likes of Hernandez, Sarah and Dowell condense themselves into the middle. Hernandez and Dowell obviously both like to cut inside, and as much as we've spoken about direct wingers perhaps thriving under Wagner, I think they are more likely to be inverted, which means that they sort of come inside off the wings onto their stronger feet, which both Hernandez and Dowell obviously naturally do when they play on the left and right respectively, as they did on Saturday. And that allows the space for Giannoulis to come and be the most forthright attacker and to have that space out wide, and for Aarons to do the same. And I think that space is an important part of it. It's a big part of Pep Guardiola's philosophy, is actually that you don't want two players occupying the same space at the same time. So having that channel free for Giannoulis and Aarons to get in there not only allows them to sort of not get in each other's way, but it means that Hernandez and Dowell can be used in other areas and can occupy other spaces that might take defenders out of position or or give them an opportunity to attack. And Hernandez and Dowell often come into the half spaces, which is the sort of the space roughly between the edge of the box, sort of the line, the wide closest to the touchline, and the sort of the edge of the D. If you imagine that space as a sort of channel, that's where Hernandez and Dowell will often pop up, and then you obviously have Giannoulis and Aarons outside them, and that allows Norwich to attack with a sort of 5 or 6 at times when Gabriel Sara gets up into the box, with Sargent and Pukki most central, Hernandez and Dowell in the half spaces, and then Giannoulis and Aarons on the outsides, and that covers most bases. So not only do you have it where there's more passing options and there was always somebody in position, but when the ball drops, you've probably got more areas covered, almost in a zonal way. I know that's not a very popular term to be using, and people aren't huge fans of it, but if you see that in a sort of attacking sense, you can probably see the benefits of having those players individually within those channels. And something I noticed in the Preston game that I think was a really good idea was when Hernandez and Dowell don't come inside and they actually stay almost up by the corner flags, Gabriel Sara will drop out wide to create an overload. And what that does is even when the winger's back, as they were with Preston switched to a back four so that they could match up Norwich. And when they have a winger and a fullback, they'd like to go 2v2 with Giannoulis and Hernandez as an example. But when Sara drops out there, unless they want to have a midfielder dragged out wide as well and leave such a gaping hole in the middle, which maybe Kenny McLean could come on and exploit, or Josh Sargent could drop in and find some space in, then they have to let Norwich have 3/2. And obviously, if you've got 3/2 in that scenario, it's very easy for you to find the ball to the free man eventually at the byline and cut the ball back. And that was a really encouraging sign. Gabriel Sara's movement is so intelligent, so he's the perfect person to have dropping into that and timing their run perfectly to create that overload. And then getting the player to the byline is a really key skill, because that's what Teemu Pukki thrives on. If you look at many of his goals in the 2018-19 campaign when he was best, in my view, in a Norwich shirt, so many of them are Max Aarons or Jamal Lewis getting right to the byline and cutting it back. As we know, he's not a particularly strong header of the ball, or if he is, he's not able to get his head on it too much because of his sort of height and physicality compared with Championship defenders. And if you're crossing from deep, that tends to be in a sort of aerial way and trying to bypass the defence by crossing in the air, and that doesn't suit Teemu Pukki. Whereas when you're at the byline, much easier, because defenders don't want to be scoring own goals. It's much easier to pick out a man there and to create danger by cutting the ball back, as opposed to whipping it high in the air. And that's what Teemu Pukki thrives on. That's that sort of scenario. I don't know if it was created by a fullback getting to the byline, but that scenario in which he found his first goal, a sort of poacher's finish, is the ideal scenario for him. And if you have fullbacks getting to the byline, that's much more his style of play and his sort of chance created than a whipped ball in. And I'm sure if any of us watched the Dean Smith system, we would have said that Teemu Pukki needs to be fed more effectively. So that's a really encouraging sign, and something that I think all Norwich fans will be excited to see, that development of the fullbacks, especially given how technically good they are and how good we've all seen they can be within the right system. I think that development of how Wagner uses fullbacks can be really useful in future. So yeah, just to take you through the predicted 11. Obviously, I always do this, but now it feels a bit of a technicality, because I do think Norwich City will be unchanged, with Tim Krul in goal, Max Aarons at right back, Andrew Mbamidele and Grant Hanley at centre back, Dimitris Giannoulis at left back, Kenny McLean in a slightly deeper midfield role, Kieran Dowell on the right, Ono Hernandez on the left, and Gabriel Sara behind Josh Sargent and Teemu Pukki. Now, there's not too much space on the graphic to show the various levels of people, but it's almost a linear progression from McLean, Sara, Sargent, Pukki, because you may well see it as a sort of 4-4-2, but it actually will look more like McLean dropping in almost as part of the back three at times to progress the ball. Gabriel Sara slightly in front of him, and then Josh Sargent slightly in front of him behind Teemu Pukki. That was something we saw, and I'm not sure many of us saw Josh Sargent as a sort of creative attacker and somebody who could make chances for Teemu Pukki, but there was a fantastic ball slid through for him for that second goal, that Kieran Dowell tap in, that I think showed he can play that role behind Pukki. He's probably a player we associate with physicality most, but if you think back to Kenny McLean at Everton, if anybody remembers that performance, I'm quite a huge McLean fan, so I wouldn't be surprised if I'm in the minority, but he was used as a sort of physical number 10. So we've seen it work before, not only in the Championship, but in the league, in the Premier League, where Norwich aspire to be. So I see Josh Sargent probably playing that role once again, slightly off Pukki, slightly more rotating and in and around the player sort of out wide. He helps Sarah with that overloading out wide that I spoke about, and I see him playing a sort of similar role. But after that performance against Preston, Wagner confirmed yesterday that the entire squad that was available for that Preston game would be available. The only person sort of close to returning to injury is Ben Gibson, but he won't be available. So after that performance, how could you really change it unless he's sort of worried about being caught out and being figured out to the same extent as a Guardiola, which I don't get the sense he will be in his second week in charge. So I'm very much expecting to see this team. This is one of my more difficult jobs to do in the week, is to predict this 11, but I'm confident that I've got it right this time, and that the fullbacks will be used in a very advanced role. So hopefully we do see that. Thank you for joining me once again on Tactics Board. There's so much stuff across Pinken channels now, as there always is around the match day. Terrace Talk is up from a couple of days ago, where you can sort of get the Coventry view. Wagner's press conference, of course, where he goes over all the key lines, not just around this match, but around Todd Cantwell's future, Tammy Pukki's future, and his sort of contract discussions. And then we've got the Pinken preview show, which me and Adam did earlier today, answering your questions and discussing all the key topics going into the game. Tomorrow we'll have Team News live at 2 p.m, where Paddy and Connor will break down what they think of the team news and their reaction to it. And then after the game, we'll have Connor's Verdict podcast. So much stuff for you to keep up with across this channel. And then if you are a fan of written content, I'd of course point you to Pinken.com and the Pinken Plus app, which also has some really good video and audio content for just $1.99 a month. I think that's a really great deal. My reference point is always Tubes of Fruit Pastels in 2013. Unfortunately, I don't buy sweets from the news agents on the way back from school anymore. So that's the most recent data point I have. But at that time, a tube of fruit pastels was 50p each. So for less than 4 tubes of fruit pastels in 2013 in Northamptonshire, you can get unlimited access to all of our articles, video, audio, and just your Norwich City hub really, and all the content you need across Pinken Plus. And I think there is a 30-day free trial, and if you take it out for a year, if you take a subscription out for a year, it's just £20. So I think your first 13 months, if my working out is correct, your first 13 months can cost you only £20, and that's for unlimited access to all the Norwich City content you should need. So yeah, get stuck into that. Find out more about that at pinken.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining me once again, and I'll see you again very, very soon on Tactics Board.